His lips were still wet from my tears when his hands spread my thighs apart. My black dress was still halfway rolled up around my waist. My panties? On the floor. My husband had just been buried yesterday, but I was pinned against my living room couch by the same man who helped carry his casket. Isaiah. My neighbor. My temptation. He whispered my name like it was a prayer, but what we were doing had nothing holy in it. His skin glistened against mine, his breath hot against my neck. I should have stopped it, but my body had betrayed me long before my heart did. That moment I let go. Of everything. Of the pain. Of the past. Of my vows. I wrapped my legs around a man who was not my husband, and never had been. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Sandra Miles. 51. American. A housewife for the most part. My husband, Robert, was 62 when he died. Massive heart attack in the middle of the night. I was lying next to him when it happened. He made a noise like he was choking, and by the time I turned the light on, his lips were already turning blue. It was over just like that. We had been married for 28 years. He was not perfect, but he was mine. Or at least I thought he was. The funeral was small. Just a few family members, a couple of old friends, some neighbors. One of those neighbors was Isaiah Thompson, 37, tall, smooth, dark skin like polished mahogany, and eyes that always looked like they knew too much. He lived 3 houses down. A single man, no kids, no wife. Just muscles, a clean smile, and a quiet way of moving through the world. I caught him watching me at the funeral. Not in a disrespectful way. It was something else. Something that made my stomach flutter in the middle of my grief. I hated myself for feeling it, but I felt it anyway. The house was too quiet the day after. No footsteps. No newspaper landing on the porch. No one asking for coffee. Just the sound of the fridge humming and the rain tapping against the windows. That was when the doorbell rang. I did not want to open it. I had been crying off and on all morning. My hair was a mess, my face puffy, and I still wore the black dress from yesterday. But something told me to open that door. It was Isaiah. He wore a gray hoodie, jeans, and that calm expression he always had, like the world could fall apart and he would still just blink slowly. Just checking in, he said, his voice smooth, deep, comforting. I let him in. We sat in the living room. He did not try to talk much. Just let me sit with my legs curled under me, sipping wine I probably should not have opened. Then I started crying again. And he moved closer. I could not explain what happened next, not fully. One minute he was wiping my tears, the next his hand was on my thigh. And I let it stay there. Grief does things to you. It makes you hollow, then fills you with the wrong things. Lust, anger, hunger. The kind of hunger that no food can fix. He leaned in, and I did not move back. His lips were warm, gentle at first, just a kiss. Then another. Then he tasted my neck, my collarbone, the skin above my breasts. I felt my dress slip off my shoulder. My breathing changed. His hands were large and warm, and when they moved under my dress, I did not stop him. I needed to feel something. I needed to forget the coldness of Robert's body. I needed heat, and Isaiah gave me heat. On that couch, in the home I once shared with my husband, I let another man make love to me. His body pressed against mine, sweat and sorrow mixing in the silence between our moans. I cried again, not because of grief this time, but because I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Afterwards, I lay there, naked under a blanket, my legs still tingling, my heart thudding with confusion. Isaiah kissed my forehead and whispered, "You do not have to be alone." But I felt more alone than ever. I wanted to scream, to slap myself, to take it all back. But the truth was, I did not want to take it back. And that scared me more than anything. I did not sleep that night. I lay on the couch in a blanket that still smelled like Isaiah's skin, my body aching with the weight of what I had done. My bedroom was just down the hallway, untouched, undisturbed, like a museum of the life I used to live. But I could not go in there, not after what I had done in the living room, not with the ghost of Robert watching me from every photograph on the wall. I kept thinking about Isaiah's words. You do not have to be alone. It sounded like comfort, but the more I repeated it in my head, the more it started to sound like something else. A promise? A warning? I was not sure. The morning after felt like waking up after a car crash. There was no blood, but something was definitely broken. My guilt was loud, and it followed me from room to room like a shadow. I took a long shower, scrubbing my skin as if I could erase his fingerprints from my thighs. I told myself it was grief, that what happened with Isaiah was a moment of weakness, a mistake. But if it was a mistake, why did part of me want it to happen again? I went to the kitchen and tried to make breakfast. Toast. Eggs. The smell of butter made my stomach twist. That was Robert's favorite. Every Saturday morning, without fail. I threw it all in the trash. The doorbell rang just after 10. My breath caught in my throat. I rushed to the mirror, panicked at the thought that it might be Isaiah again. I checked my hair, wiped under my eyes, smoothed my shirt. It was not Isaiah. It was my sister, Karen. She wore black, too. The kind of black that said mourning and judgment all at once. She gave me a tight hug, her perfume overwhelming, and came in with her mouth already moving. She wanted to check on me, make sure I was eating, sleeping, not losing it. Her words, not mine. I nodded through most of it, barely listening. My mind was back on last night, on Isaiah, on how his hands felt, how his voice sounded when he whispered my name. Karen poured herself a cup of coffee, like she owned the place. She sat down and looked me straight in the eye. You look different. I blinked. Different how? I do not know. Tired. Flushed. Something. I smiled weakly. It has been a hard week. She nodded, but something in her expression changed. Suspicion? Concern? I could not tell, but it made my heart pound a little faster. Over the next few days, I avoided Isaiah. I avoided everyone. I told myself I needed space, time to grieve. But really, I was hiding. Then one evening, while pulling the trash bin to the curb, I saw him again. Isaiah was shirtless, standing in his driveway, watering the grass. The sun was setting behind him, casting a golden glow over his chest. His eyes met mine, and he gave a slow, knowing nod. I froze. He started walking toward me. I turned and went back inside, closing the door a little too fast. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Isaiah, are you okay? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, I cannot do this. Seconds passed. Isaiah, you already did. I wanted to hate him for that, but I could not, because he was right. A few days later, I found myself in his house. I told myself I was just returning the casserole dish he had brought over weeks ago. But the truth is, I needed to see him. The house smelled like sandalwood and something else. Something male. Dark wood floors. Clean furniture. Framed photos of landscapes and cities. Not a single woman's touch in sight. He took the dish from my hands, and I knew by the way he looked at me that he wanted more than a thank you. I stepped back, nervous. I should go, but I did not move. He reached out and touched my wrist, and I let him. The second time was not like the first. It was slower, deeper. He undressed me carefully, like I was something precious. He kissed every inch of my body like he had memorized it, and I let myself feel it all. Every moment. every breath. Afterwards, I sat on his bed with the sheet wrapped around me. My heart was pounding. My fingers trembled. He looked over at me. Why do you always look guilty afterwards? Because I am. You are not cheating on anyone.
No.
But I am cheating myself. He raised an eyebrow. Of what? Of peace. Of healing. Of the time I am supposed to be using to mourn. Isaiah got out of bed, pulled on his jeans, and stood at the window. His back was smooth and strong. You think Robert would have waited? I blinked. What?
He turned.
You think he would have sat around crying over you? What is that supposed to mean? He looked at me with something I had not seen before in his eyes, bitterness. I suddenly felt cold. What do you know that I do not? I asked. Isaiah walked over and picked up something from his nightstand. A manila envelope. I was not going to say anything, he said, but maybe you deserve to know. He handed it to me. I opened it. Photos. Robert. With another woman. A much younger woman. In a motel parking lot. Over and over again. Different dates. Different clothes. Same betrayal. I could not breathe. I looked up at Isaiah, and my voice cracked. Why do you have these?
He sighed.
Because he asked me to lie for him. To cover for him. For months. My stomach turned. I said no, Isaiah continued. So he stopped talking to me. But I never stopped watching. My heart pounded in my ears. I wanted to scream. To tear the photos. To forget. But instead, I just stared at them. I thought I was the traitor. But Robert had betrayed me first. That night, I lay awake again. But this time, not with guilt. With rage. Isaiah touched me again before I left. But it was different. There was anger in it. In me. A fire I did not know I had. I was not just a widow anymore. I was a woman reborn from pain. And pain has a price. The nights grew colder, and so did my heart. I had seen the truth. Robert, my late husband, had betrayed me, but somehow it felt like the sting of his unfaithfulness was not as sharp as the ache of my own actions. I had not just been a passive victim of betrayal. I had sought out solace in someone else's arms, the arms of the very man who had watched my husband deceive me for months. I had never felt more ashamed of myself, but I could not stop thinking about Isaiah. His touch, his words, the way he made me feel alive after so much death. It was as if every moment I spent with him was a slap in the face to everything I once believed was sacred. The morning after I saw the photos, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for the universe to explain why everything had turned out this way. My thoughts were a chaotic mess of guilt, anger, and longing. I needed to know what to do next, but I had no answers. Just questions. I told myself I would stop, that I would turn away from Isaiah and start healing. But deep down, I knew it was too late for that. Once the walls had come down, once I had crossed that line, there was no turning back. Later that day, I received a message. Isaiah, we need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I typed back, my fingers trembling. Me, I am not sure what there is to say. Isaiah, come over. I need to see you. Please. I should have ignored him. I should have stayed away. But instead, I grabbed my coat, grabbed my car keys, and drove to his house without a second thought. The wind howled outside, rattling the trees, but inside, there was only the heavy silence of what was to come. When I arrived, he was waiting for me by the door, looking like he had been pacing. He stepped aside to let me in, his eyes dark and unreadable. You should not have come, he said quietly, closing the door behind me. His tone was softer than usual, but there was an edge to it that I did not recognize. I know, I whispered. But here I am. We stood there for a long time, neither of us speaking, just feeling the tension between us grow with every passing second. Finally, he moved towards the kitchen. You want something to drink? No, I answered, following him. I just want to talk. Isaiah poured himself a drink anyway, a glass of whiskey that looked too strong, too dark. What is this about? I asked, my voice breaking. What do you want from me? He took a long sip of his drink and stared at me with those intense eyes that had once been comforting, but now only made me feel exposed. I want the truth. I swallowed hard. The truth? About everything, he said, his voice low. About Robert. About us. About what this is. I could not breathe. The walls were closing in around me. I do not know how to answer that. You already have, he said, his eyes flickering to the glass in his hand. You do not need to lie to me, Sandra. I already know. I closed my eyes, the guilt heavy in my chest. I never meant for this to happen. I know, he said quietly. But it did happen. I looked at him, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I do not know what to do anymore. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to betray Robert, even though he betrayed me. I just wanted someone to see me, to make me feel alive again. Isaiah's expression softened for a moment, but it quickly hardened again. And now that you feel alive, what are you going to do with it? I do not know, I whispered. I am confused. His gaze never left me. I am not going to lie to you, Sandra. I want more than this. More than just these stolen moments. I blinked. What do you mean? I do not want to be just a rebound, he said quietly. I do not want to be the guy you run to when you are lonely. I want something real. I stared at him, unable to speak. This was not the conversation I had expected. What about you? I finally managed to ask. What do you want from me? He took another sip of his whiskey, his eyes flickering with something that looked like regret. I want you to choose. To choose if this, what we have, is worth more than the pain it brings. The truth hit me like a freight train. I was standing at a crossroads. I could stay with the man who had betrayed me and my own heart, Robert's death still fresh in my mind, and pretend to mourn. Or I could face what I had done, what Isaiah and I had done, and risk everything for something that might never be. What was I willing to lose? Was I already too far gone to fix what was broken? Later that night, I stood in my bedroom, looking out the window at the stars, thinking about what Isaiah had said. I had already let myself slip into the arms of another man. Was I prepared to let go of everything for the possibility of something more? Or was I doomed to live in this limbo, forever tethered to my past, unable to move forward? There was no easy answer. But I knew one thing for sure. I had made my bed. Now I had to lie in it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you feel the power of this tale, please drop your comments below. Let me know what you think. Do you believe in second chances? If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories and dramatic journeys. Your support means everything.